Hello, everyone. My name is Chad Cunningham, the Director of Loss Control here at Insurance Board. I would like to welcome you to this time of learning with our topic of stewardship strategies, leveraging grants to serve your church. Before we let the speaker start, there are a couple of guidelines I would like to share. One, this webcast will be recorded and placed on our website for future viewing, and you will receive an email link very soon. The chat function has been turned off. We will be using the question and answer function. So if you find those at the bottom of the screen, you will be able to save all the questions to the end of the presentation. So while we're waiting and you're here listening to me, if you look at the bottom toolbar of your screen, you should see the question and answer button. And that is how we will answer your questions at the end. We will compile those and answer those. Restrooms, well, those could be down the hallway, outside the door, or wherever you may be, but you know where those are. And if you have not answered the poll yet, please do so now while I introduce our speakers for today's presentation. So today we have three speakers that is going to share their information with us. Our first speaker is going to be Michelle Carver. Michelle Carver is the founder and president of Philanthropia, LLC, a philanthropic and strategy engagement company established with the express purpose of growing and augmenting philanthropy and funding to nonprofits and municipalities. After her will be Elizabeth Vance. Elizabeth Vance is a senior loss control representative. Before joining the loss control team, Elizabeth spent 12 years in the marketing department with the insurance board. Her total tenure with the insurance board is 16 years. She is very familiar with the churches and has presented to churches on a variety of topics, including active intruder awareness and response, financial controls, abuse prevention, third-party agreements, and other risk prevention topics. She holds a bachelor's degree in public relations. And we also have Shelley Spielman. Shelley Spielman is the officer manager of Middletown Christian Church in Kentucky and a former journalist and news editor. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism in Indiana University. Shelley serves in many roles for the church, including administrative support, event planning, communications, and most recently, grant writing. Before working for MCC, Shelley spent several years in the nonprofit industry as a community-based services director and residential program manager for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I think looking forward to today's presentation. We have great information. And now what I'd like to do is turn it over to our first presenter, Michelle Carver. Michelle?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Chad, for the introduction. I am so grateful to have been invited to participate today by Elizabeth and the Insurance Board. So thank you all so much for tuning in and listening to what we have to say. I am going to share some key considerations to keep in mind for you when you're applying for grants on behalf of your organization. So I hope you find some things very interesting. So first, I'll start at the very beginning. Everything kind of boils down to whether or not you are registered on sam.gov when you're applying for any type of government grant. So federal, state, local government grants, you all need to have an active registration on sam.gov. So this is the very, very first step. It shouldn't really take very long to register. Once you do register, you will be assigned a unique entity identifier, or UEI for short. Keep track of this number, UEI. You'll have to put it into any grants that you write and ask for on behalf of the government. Share it with people in your organization. I always keep a document separate for each of my clients that specifies their UEI, so I don't have to go look it up. It's just very helpful. So the other thing you need to know is once you register, you will need to renew annually with sam.gov. You will never have to pay to register or renew your account with sam.gov. So there are a lot of third-party companies out there that you'll start getting postcards from when it's time to renew. You do not need them. You just need to actively go on and renew it yourself. So I can't stress that enough. It's just always very free. One other important item. So once you have registered your organization and it's been processed, you want to make sure and go on and ask one of your coworkers to register themselves connected to that account so they have an active login as well. This is helpful to have, so if one person leaves the organization, there's always another person who can get into SAM.gov. I've been at organizations before where I've had to jump through, I can't even tell you, countless hoops and so many hurdles just to get myself on there because the active person left and there was no other way because they stress you can't use someone else's email address and email login to add someone else. You have to go through the hoops, and that's calling them, submitting information, notarized information. And if you don't sign it correctly, I didn't sign it correctly, and so it delayed more. I put the A in as my middle initial, and I didn't have it in my SAM.gov registration, so that held things up. So you have to really be very careful and very detailed when you're doing this. Once you do register, you're going to need to know your organization's exact legal name, the date of your incorporation, your fiscal year end date, and you'll also have to upload documents that have all that information to prove you are your organization. It's kind of a hassle at points, but it's totally worth it because then you'll be able to apply for an unlimited amount of grants that your organization would be eligible for. When reviewing a potential grant, you should note which other portals that you will need to register your organization in. Sometimes you have to register in grants.gov, and you also have to have a registration on Just Grants. You have to make sure you register well in advance of the deadline so you can access the information and follow all steps. Basically, as with any grant, cross your T's, dot your I's, everything has to be perfect. So each state may have its own portal as well. Ohio, I'm based in Ohio. The state of Ohio uses IntelliGrants. So you just have to get on there and make sure that your organization is registered. So that's the biggest first step. Next is review and understand the required sections and what information the funder is requesting. This is like really, really key here. At this point, what I do is I copy and paste the questions, any kind of directions in the questions into a Word doc so I can write everything in one place and share that document with other people as necessary. This just helps me make sure I'm not repeating myself in the different sections and also helps me refine my writing. I feel like that really works well for me. You might have something else that really would work well for you, but if you're putting stuff in a portal, it's always good to have that information stored somewhere else. I also like to keep it in a Word doc because if I'm working on more than one grant for a client, I can use language going forward and just copy and paste it from one Word doc to another as I need it. When I'm doing this, I also note the character or word allotment for each section so I can make sure I can stay within range. This is really important because when you're going to drop your information into a portal, you don't want to have to take time the day before the grant is due to rewrite and edit it down to get into the specific 2,500 characters that you're allotted for each section sometimes. So once you do begin writing your grant request, make sure to keep your narrative aligned with the funding opportunity. I know, I can also be very verbose, so I always have to make sure I'm editing myself and making sure that the information I'm providing kind of directly gets back to what the funding request is for. You'll start writing a very strong problem statement for grants, for federal grants, which identifies the issue or issues for which your organization is asking for funding. So a very clear, concise problem statement. Oh goodness. I think I totally skipped something. Anyway, so I'll go back. A very clear problem statement connects to your vulnerability assessment, and you need to include as much data as possible when you're writing your problem statement. So is your church in a higher crime area? Have you had any illegal activities occur on or near your property? What are the demographics of the community you serve? Is your building open for programming for the community? Do people feel safe coming to your location? Have there been threats to the specific community you serve, so you need to increase your security? All of that data can kind of go back and kind of uphold your problem statement and really speak to the problem that you have, so you're more likely to get funding. Data is a huge point of any grant that I write. So you're also use the data points to support your need for this funding. So always kind of connect it back to that. Once you do things like that, you also might need to go back and substantiate any threats or risks that your organization may face. Include that in your problem statement. Outline how the funding will be used and what measures your organization will take to address the problem to help solve the issue or alleviate it. Funders want to know what you're going to do. You have to be very clear what you're going to do with the money should you receive it. You also have to justify the amount for the cost that you're asking for. That's pretty big. And then be as detailed as possible. Make sure to include what could happen if you do not receive the funding. I'm going to go back one slide because I totally skipped part of this.
Excuse me, Michelle, while you're going back there, your screen is not being shared, your presentation. If you could pull your presentation up, please.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Sure. Can everyone see that now? Okay.
Yeah, you're sharing now. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So once you review your eligibility and your grant requirements and the organization's eligibility for the grant, if there's an informational webinar that you can attend, I would really strongly suggest you do that. Most of the information you could probably read about in the grant requirements, but there are usually a couple nuggets of information here or there that you could pick up that will be very important going forward. So some of the things you might need when you're asking for a grant, you might need to do a vulnerability assessment. Most of these grants, if you're asking for safety and security upgrades, you need to prove that you actually need those safety and security upgrades. And so you need to have a professional come onto your property and do a vulnerability assessment. My suggestion when you're doing one is to have the person who's directly involved in writing the grant be with that person who's conducting the assessment, just to make sure that everything that you want to apply for in the grant is reflected on the vulnerability assessment as well. So the other thing is make sure the assessment is finalized and sent to you well in advance of the grant deadline so you can review it if you need to make any changes or have any kind of updates to that to make sure that it's reflective of exactly what you want to ask for. You'll have time to do that and get it back. The other thing you have to consider is if you need any vendor quotes to justify the cost of what you're asking for. They want to see, you know, if you've done your research, do you have any quotes from vendors to give you an idea of the exact amount? Make sure to receive those well in advance as well, so you can review it, make sure that the only things that are reflecting on the quotes are the things that you'll be asking for in the grant that you're eligible for and that the grant said that it would fund. I would make sure to take anything else off of that so there's no confusion. And then if there's a project timeline, do you need to create one? Who's going to be responsible for what? Make sure the vendors are on board with it, that they know the information. And then that's something that you want to make sure is achievable because you're going to be have to explain that in your quarterly reports as well. That's that. Sorry, I should have really put these into pages. That's okay. The next thing you might be asked to do or identify any objectives and goals that you have for the funding should you receive it. I like to triple check and make sure my goals are measurable, accurate, realistic, and make sure that they're also achievable. It's another thing that you'll be reporting on during the length of the grant should you receive it. For the budget, sometimes grantors send a specific spreadsheet for you to use. So allow yourself enough time to align your budget to theirs and also write any required narrative. Sometimes they want you to really delve into it. Other times it's just tell me the numbers. If they don't provide a budget spreadsheet, you want to make sure that your budget is clear and easy to read and understand. So they don't have any questions. If they have, the more questions they have after they receive your grant, sometimes the less likely they are to fund it. One thing I like to remember, a grant proposal, this is kind of a hot topic in the grant world. I think it's a sales pitch. You're basically shining a light on your organization and your needs. You want to make them want to fund your project. So you have to make sure that you're telling them enough information so I don't know, they kind of not feel bad for you, but they want to fund your project so you can kind of get past the problem issue that you're having. You have to earn their trust and you have to convey confidence with your words in your grant proposal. They have to feel that you'll be good stewards of the money they grant your organization, on top of believing that you need it far more than other organizations that are applying. So make sure that you choose your words carefully and concisely. Make sure you answer all their questions in each section and make sure you provide all necessary information or you may be eliminated from review. That's a really big thing. And finally, there are other types of funding out there. Beyond government grants, there's community foundations, corporate foundations. Does your church offer any programming to your community beyond your parishioners? So if it does, take a look at the private community foundations and the corporate foundations that are based in your area. Depending on the type of program, you might be able to receive private foundation funding for it, especially if it aligns with the goals of the funders. If you can make a strong argument, then you might receive, $10,000, $15,000, $50,000. If you get some of this programming funded, you can then use other income that your organization has to, on purposes that maybe are not eligible for grant funding. So foundations are a huge support. So you always have to review your eligibility and make sure your program is open to all people and it doesn't discriminate on race, color, national origin, disability, age, sex, religion, all that stuff. The other thing I will suggest is use your network. I'm a big person. I believe in the strength of building relationships across different sectors. Use the people who come to your church. Ask them if they're connected to any kind of foundation. Ask them if they can open that door for you and make that connect for you so you can host a meeting or host them for a tour. It's, it sounds kind of difficult, but if everything aligns, it's pretty easy to get them through your door and show them what you're doing beyond just, Sunday service. And they love to see hands-on too. So if you can invite them for a tour, that would be great. The other thing, I don't know where my last slide went. So the other thing I would tell you is try to have fun with it. I know it's kind of a big, hairy thing. So it's hard. You have to be very detail oriented, but try to have fun with it. Make it your own and, get out there and happy writing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michelle. My name is Elizabeth Vance. I'm going to be presenting next. And I just wanted to go over a couple things. So I want everyone to understand that the grant process can be laborsome and it can be lengthy as well. Shelley's going to talk specifically about what her experience was, but having worked with churches now for 16 years, I know many churches who've been successful at securing funding, and most of the funding that churches are utilizing are indeed federal funds because they tend to make the funds available more than anything. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes, and I'm going to talk about some funding opportunities for your church. Now, the first funding opportunity, it will be for what's called the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. That is the grant that most of the churches who have utilized grant programs that have shared their information with me have benefited from. And Shelley specifically will talk about her process for this. But basically, the nonprofit security grant, they do have one that is specific for houses of worship. And they have two major funding streams. One is for state and one is for urban areas. The importance of applying within the right area is that you may not get a chance to reapply. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because Shelley was instrumental in engaging her local FEMA office to help her with this process. So you will understand all of that when she gets to that point. But there's high risk urban areas. So that's this, gosh, I can't see because this is here. So your SAA, that is the organization that you're going to work with. It's the State Security Association. That's who Shelley worked with, and that's who you're going to work with too when you put together your grant specifically for this particular grant. And the links, these are going to be provided to you, and they're all active links. So they're all going to work for you when you click through them. So there it is. Sorry, the State Administrative Agency. And the nonprofit security grant awards are generally allocated based on what's called a vulnerability assessment and then an investment justification. So what does that look like? Some of the churches have used the money for new windows. Some of the churches have used the money for new door locks or security cameras or whatever that may be. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And Shelley's going to tell you how she used her funds. Basically, a vulnerability assessment is what starts the process. Because this is a nonprofit security grant program, they want to make sure that you are in a vulnerable area or you have a vulnerability that makes you eligible. And they use it to validate the physical security deficiencies of your organization or facility. It's basically the foundation, okay? And it can be provided in multiple ways. The most popular way, and the way I would encourage you to do it, is through CISA, which is a Department of Homeland Security's division called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Okay, they have what's called PSAs, and those are called Protective Security Advisors. They will go out and do an assessment for your organization. It's free of charge. Shelley had one done, so we'll talk about that in a minute, but there's contact information here. I would like to be able to say to you, here's your state, here's your PSA. It doesn't work that way. They don't publicize who their PSAs are. I do provide you with the email address. If you reach out to this email address and tell them where you're located, they will tell you who your protective security advisor is for the area. Not only will they do a vulnerability assessment, but they will come out and do a presentation for your church if you would like them to, on anything regarding security, what current threats are in your area, what is trending in your area or of concern in your area. But it doesn't have to be done by the PSA. You can use a contractor, or you can use local law enforcement, any one of them. The benefit of using the PSA is if you tell the PSA that you're doing it for the nonprofit security grant, they will help tailor their report so that you can just cut and paste from their report into your grant application. So you can obviously understand the benefit of that. Now, the Department of Homeland Security's grant program specific to the nonprofit security has all kinds of information available to you. I provided all these links So you will have it. It basically goes, there's an overview. Okay, there's a state list, so you don't even have to go worry, just go to the list, look up your state, it'll tell you. There's a manual. It's going to help you walk through how to apply for the grant. They have webinars. If you've never participated in a Department of Homeland Security webinar before, I would encourage you to go out to their website and register for email notifications for all of their webinars. It isn't just for the grants, it's for other related issues, but certainly for the grants, it will help you. There's an investment justification template. You heard Michelle talk about justifying the investment. So there's literally a template that will help you walk through how to tailor your messaging for the grant application. There's a technical assistance online training facility, there's a helpline, there's email communication, there's a grants learning center, there's resources. All of that is available for you, and all of these links will be provided to you. So this is all specific to the nonprofit security grant. And the reason, again, I talk about that is because of all of the grants that I have churches reaching out to me and discussing with me and letting me know what they've been successful. This has been the biggest, and partly because it's big dollars. Shelley's going to talk about, she was able to secure $150,000 for her church. So there's big dollars as opposed to some of the more community foundational ones, which will be 10, 15,000, which is still significant money, but it's not as big as $150,000. But there's other options as well, not just the security grant. And I provide all these links for you. The Department of Labor has grants. The Department of Health and Human Services has grants. The Department of Commerce, the Small Business Administration, and your church is indeed a small business. The USVA has grants for you as well. The Department of Agriculture, Department of Justice. All of these, if you go click, it will tell you what options are for faith-based communities or faith-based organizations within the community and how you can benefit from the dollars. The U.S. National Park Service, which helps with state, tribal, local, and they have plans and grants. And I just wanted to give you kind of some examples here of what they have that are available. They have a History for Equal Rights grants. If your church has historical value, I know a lot of our churches, there have been churches that are directly have ties to the Underground Railroad. That's a historical grant. There's grants to restore structures on historically Black colleges and university campuses. There's underrepresented communities grants, tribal heritage grants, just disaster recovery grants. It's emergency funding through the National Park Service to help preserve anything that that is within a historical site. So other states have grants, and states have what's called a liaison for faith-based communities. And I give a link here so that you can research all of the states and which ones have offices for faith-based community initiative. You can reach out with them and see what funding they have available. There's the National Fund for Sacred Places. There's National Endowment for the Humanities, National Trust for Historic Preservation. Every one of these links that you're going to be given are going to have links to how to apply for grants and what grants are available for your church. And there's more than one. And then check local, like Michelle said, there could be some community functions and community foundations that would have money for you. And when you think about applying for a grant, you really have to have a specific need in mind. And Shelley's going to talk about what she initially thought she was going to apply for and what she ended up applying for, and how her local FEMA office was able to help her as she was working through the grant process. I know that we're going through a lot of information in a very, very short period of time, but you will receive all this information and my contact information. I'm the middle person right here, Elizabeth Vance. If you say, hey, I attended the webcast and I still have questions, I am more than happy to get on a call with you and help you, because we want our churches to benefit from this money. And I know we sent out an email about almost a month ago about some of the funds that were available to churches. And some of the communication that we have gotten back from our churches about that email was that oh, the date expired, or the date is no longer available, or the date passed. Working with the national organizations, your federal organizations, the one thing to keep in mind is a lot of them are renewed annually. They're just going on and on and on and on and on. And so if you miss this year's, it's not a lost cause, because the process is usually pretty involved and it's probably going to take you more than a week to work on it anyway. So if you miss this year's, there's always next year. And then there's always next year. A lot of these organizations, again, especially the federal ones, they're funding them again and again and again. As far as what are the best resources to learn about possible grants, I think I've given you a lot from a federal standpoint, as well as a lot to consider when looking for grants. And I would say reach out to your state offices, the liaison, some of those organizations I mentioned. All of that information will be made available to you. So hopefully those will be some resources. And I'm going to move very quickly on to introducing Shelly Spielman. And Shelly and I are going to be on the video together. And we will not be sharing screens. This will be a Q&A. Hi, Shelly. Welcome.
Hi. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you've been listening.
I
And let me just remind everyone, Shelly Spielman joins us from Middletown Christian Church in Kentucky. She was successful at securing her church a $150,000 grant after attending a workshop that I did on
Mhm.
security. And we talked specifically about vulnerability assessments and grant funding options. And we did that in November of 2022. So Shelly, I know I sent you some questions and answers, but I've been reviewing some of the questions that people have been asking. And since we have a little bit more time,
Yeah, no
I
problem.
thought maybe we could quickly back up a second. And I want you to speak to what was the first thing you did when you
Mhm.
decided you wanted to apply for the nonprofit security grant. Tell me the very first thing you did after you and I finished up our presentation in November.
The very first thing I did was I contacted our DHS assessor, our local one, and I contacted him and was like, "Hey, can I get on the schedule for you to perform an assessment at my facility?" And I got one conducted in January of last year. And from there, I went to like SAM to get my unique ID. But my first step was getting that assessment
That
conducted.
vulnerability assessment, right?
Yes.
So you reached out to Kyle, because in Kentucky, we know it was Kyle. We had met Kyle, so we knew Kyle. You reached out to Kyle in November and were on his schedule by January. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. That's correct.
And just so we're clear, there was no cost associated with that, correct?
That's correct. There was no
It was
cost.
free. He came out and he was wonderful to work with, correct?
He was great to work with. He brought up a lot of good points that I didn't even think about. Because, this is his mindset, and it's not necessarily in my day to day thinking about security. So it was very eye opening, and you receive that typed up report of all your vulnerabilities, and it's very comprehensive, a little overwhelming, but comprehensive and
Right.
good to know.
Right. So then he sent you the report, and then and then you went and applied for your SAM. What did you
Yes.
do with that report, or when did you then sit down and say, okay, we're going to open up the grant package and start reviewing what we need?
Yeah, pretty much shortly thereafter, after getting my unique ID number, I was researching into our local DH office's process, because they had on their particular state website, they had a whole PowerPoint, and they have webinars, like you mentioned, that I could kind of go to and kind of get a little bit of a lay of the land. Our deadline was usually like mid-April, May-ish. So I had a little bit of time to kind of few months to play around and kind of figure out what the process was and how to go from there to A to Z. And so from there, I saw their presentation. It gave all this PowerPoint of all the different steps throughout the process, and it definitely kind of oriented me to what needed to be done. And from there, I realized, okay, next step, it seems like I need to do the investment justification application.
Gotcha.
And yeah, so
And
that
did
was
you
what I
use
did.
that template that I was discussing? You used a template, correct?
No, I didn't use a template. I just kind of wrote it myself at several times and redid it, but just kind of whittled down. And the great thing is, once you have that DHS assessment, it really is the backbone to your grant. You don't have to work at saying, we need this or that for security, because someone already did it for you.
Right.
So it's
And before this, had you applied for have you ever done a grant application?
no. While I am a writer, formally by profession, I had never applied for a grant in my life.
Okay.
But I was like, oh, I bet I could figure it out. That's my toxic trait. I mean, I'm like, I can figure it out. Sure, why
Okay.
not? But you know, it really wasn't that bad. The application process and everything, um, they really did help walk me through it and gave me that PowerPoint of the steps and the webinars. So it was really helpful to get started.
Okay. And then so from the point you met with Kyle and did the vulnerability assessment, when did you actually then submit your application, just so that people can get an idea of how much time
Sure.
it took?
We conducted the DHS assessment on January 19th, 2023, and I submitted it's a 7-page grant application and some supporting documentation on April 13th of 2023.
Okay. So yeah, a few months.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say were the key points in your app? Like, you know, like what would you consider to be 3 key considerations that you think resulted in your success?
Yeah, I
Well,
think
let's
it's
back up for a minute. Let's back up for a
sure.
minute. How much money did you get, and what did you get it for?
Yes, I got the max amount for one location. Now, you can apply if your church hypothetically has more than one location, you can apply for multiple grants for each location, but we only have one site. So it was the max amount you can get for one site, which is $150,000.
Okay. And what did you use it for?
We are using it for new exterior doors throughout the church side of the building, and a whole new access control system with 10 cameras and access control that's tied to our cameras, which is really nice. And ballistic kind of like security window and door film that's impact resistant, shatterproof. So, I mean, if someone wanted to breach that building, it's going to take a lot of work to do so. And it
Okay.
just buys you that extra time.
Okay. Okay. So now let's talk about what do you think what were the 3 key things that made you successful?
Sure. I think the 3 key things were considering the usages of our facility that go beyond Sunday services. There's probably a lot of groups or a lot of things that you do at your church that you don't even think about. Like, for example, every week we have AA and recovery groups that meet here. So I utilize that. We have Cub Scouts. We house all sorts of different groups here. We have a preschool on site. So I was kind of able to take all of these outside groups that meet and the preschool on site and say, hey, you know, if something happened to our building, here's the groups that would be impacted and displaced. But also I considered outreach statistics, because it's not just who meets here, but how is our building utilized to serve the community. So one of the examples that I put in our outreach statistics was every November we're a part of the Thanksgiving bag drive in our area, and we're the hub for it. So other churches come together and we give out a bag of all the essentials for a Thanksgiving meal. And we give out over 700 bags. So while that's just one day, that's 700 people that are impacted that one day from our location, the service that we're able to offer. So all of those considerations put together really did matter as far as how our building's being utilized and serving the community. So there's all sorts of usage that goes outside of Sunday. Maybe you have an after-school program. We have church buses that sometimes we take the seniors to right behind our facility. We take them out to outings every month. So that's just another example. I think if you think really closely, you'll discover that there's a lot of those little things that your church is doing, hosting a blood drive, that you don't even think about.
Right. All this helped to build your
Yes.
compelling story that Michelle was
Yes.
talking about, and the need for saying, this is why we need the money, because this is what we serve and our role in the community and the value we bring.
Right, right. And then I considered our unique locations safety concerns. Now that can be a variety of things. It can be your church's particular ideology. Like for us, we are LGBTQ plus friendly, and that has unfortunately made us a target for some extremists. You consider your actual vulnerability assessment, where it speaks to maybe the aging mechanisms that need to be replaced or repaired, and maybe the lack of security cameras, information about break-ins, crime in your area.
All that
have
comes
other
from the vulnerability assessment, right? Kyle
Yes,
kind of provided you
yes,
all that. You didn't need to go do all your research and say, what does my crime rate look like? What does this look like? He provided all of that so that you had the
provided
foundation.
he provided about my building's particular vulnerabilities, but there weren't information about the area about crime or anything like that. But I did take into account just our location. We've had an increase of homeless population that have come to our facility for assistance. We've had an increase in break-ins in the area. We had a catalytic converter stolen from our church van. I don't know why, but so just those types of things, even that seem small, it could be whatever has happened that's been a threat to safety and security at your location.
Gotcha.
And from there, you take all those factors and tie it up in a bow and build your narrative around the groups and individuals who'd be displaced if your facility was no longer available to operate, the likelihood that your facility could be a target for crime or anything that would pose a threat to the building or the people in it, and your particular building's deficiencies to ward off a threat. So you kind of put all those together into a persuasive narrative of, hey, this could happen. It was kind of interesting because just as I was putting this together, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, and we had just had a mass shooting downtown, I think the week that I was submitting it. And I was like, it can happen anywhere, sadly.
Right. Well, so let's talk about what did you learn during the process that you think, because you can do this again, and I'm assuming you're gonna do it again. So what did you learn during the process that you feel will better prepare you for the next one?
I think knowing your specific building is key, what and the particular threats. And kind of getting a rough estimates of dates and specifics. In our case, we had a particular threat, and I was able to attach a police report. Maybe you've had theft or something like that. Attach an insurance claim that you filed for, hey, someone broke in the building recently or within the past few years, and we had to replace all of our handbells or whatever it was. And that is a basis.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what was the most challenging part of this process for you?
I think as someone who had never done anything like this before, just kind of navigating through it all, there's a lot of information that gets thrown at you, and it's kind of like, how do you eat the elephant, one bite at a time. So I just kind of I didn't try to concern myself with the whole process. I looked at, okay, what's the next step? What do I need to do next? And I would kind of look at it that way. Because I'm sure just like all the rest of you, you have other titles and other things you're doing at your church. So you kind of have to manage your time effectively.
Mhm.
But I think just navigating through the process and making sure that I turned in all the correct documentation and in the correct manner that they were wanting. My local DHS office was so helpful with that. I know they got to know me probably personally because I asked them like, hey, is this correct? Is this right? And they don't mind answering questions, and I have no pride about asking. So
Okay, so talk to me about that for a minute. So you're sitting down and you're filling out the grant application. At what point do you involve your local DHS office?
yeah, as I was kind of completing things, and if I'd run into kind of snags, I'm like, hey, I'm not sure about this. Like, for example, we had in the application, it asks for you to submit your projects that you would like to be completed, but you know that you have basically a budget of $150,000. So I reached out to my office and I said, okay, what are you wanting here? Are you wanting me to give you exactly $150,000 worth of needs, or can I go over? And yet, what exactly are you looking for here? And they said, yeah, whittle down your concerns to $150,000 because anything else you're going to have to fund anyway. So it helped me kind of understand what exactly they were looking for.
And then when you
And
submitted it, did you submit it to your local office or did you submit it to DHS National?
to my local office.
Gotcha. Okay. So you were working with them. They knew what you were doing. They were
Yeah.
available, accessible, and certainly
Mhm.
informational, correct?
They were wonderful. And if you're applying for this type of grant, they will have the contact people that you need to identify with at that office. And there's always more than one. So that was helpful. I had about 3 different ladies that I could kind of go to and ask questions. So
And one of the questions we got, a gentleman had asked that he felt like with federal funds, there's always like strings attached or there's some type of
right.
issue. Have you experienced anything at this point?
The only things that I've experienced is that this particular grant is a reimbursement grant, for example. So you have to make sure that you have the money up front to fund those projects, and you'll get reimbursed in about a month or so. But not everybody has an extra $150,000 just laying around.
Did
So
you
you have
need
to,
the full money set aside for the project?
you
Or
don't
can
need,
you do it in chunks?
you could do it in chunks.
Okay,
But yeah, but because we have 3 different projects and we're not going to do them all at once. I'm going to start with doors, then access control, and then the window tint last.
gotcha.
So we're submitting 3 different claims there, but you do have to have that up front. And it
And
was a
they're
weird
not
thing.
all this way, just the nonprofit security grant is a refundable one, but they're not all that way, correct?
No, they're not all that way. This particular one was. And one of the other stipulations was that the surveillance equipment and cameras, nothing could be manufactured in China. And
That's
that
right.
was just
I
one
remember
of
you telling
the,
me
yeah,
that.
we're like, oh, okay. And they outline these things in your grant agreement meeting. They want you to get this money, especially if they give it to you and they say, hey, you're awarded it. So I think there's like kind of this fear that we're not going to do it right. And they're going to say, gotcha, and take your money away. But they're really not. They're not looking to trick you. And if you have that grant agreement meeting with them, once you get it, they'll outline, hey, here's what you need to know. When you're obtaining quotes, make sure, a lot of times they're wanting you to get quotes as best as you can from American and diversity owned businesses, small businesses. Now we advertised ours in the newspaper, so it was kind of whoever, applied. But yeah, there really hasn't been a heavy amount of stipulations that I would say would have prevented me from going forward.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I just have one more question and then we're gonna open it up for questions and answers for all 3 of us from whoever wants to ask a question. But I just want to know, like, if you had any advice for all of the people on this call who I don't get to see the results of the poll, so I don't know how many have done this before or not done this before. But let's assume that nobody's done this before. Nobody knows anything about this. They are starting about as green as you started. What advice would you have for them?
I think don't be intimidated. I mean, I think a lot of people don't even start because they think I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do. But they really do help navigate you on your local department's website about the process. They have webinars. They're able to answer questions. You certainly don't have to be an expert in this. I'm not. Go ahead and get your vulnerability assessment because I mean, worst that could happen is you apply for the grant and you don't get it.
Gotcha.
That
Yep.
assessment, yeah, that assessment's good for 2 years, so you can
Mhm.
use it the next grant cycle.
Yep.
But either way, you're going to win because you're walking away with some valuable free information about your particular building's vulnerabilities.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I'm going to invite Michelle to turn her camera on, and then I'm going to read through some of the questions and we'll answer them as best we can. So the first question I have, let's go back to the beginning, was Michelle, you mentioned something called Telegrant website. Can you give a quick intro as to what that is, and was that link provided in your presentation?
So it is the portal, the website that the state of Ohio uses when you're applying for state funding. It's intelligrants.com, I believe. I could send it out. So I have to be connected to one of my clients on there when I'm completing and requesting grants on their behalf.
Okay.
So that's just one of the things you'll have to be aware of when you're applying for a grant, where you need to actively look for and apply through.
Okay.
There's different
Thank you.
portals.
And then I see, what are the best resources to learn about possible grants? I know that I provided a bunch of links, but Michelle, is there somewhere you go that when you are working with a client, it's like where you go to look for grants?
It depends on the type of client. So I work with nonprofits and then some municipalities. So it just depends on, I guess, what they're looking for, kind of what their needs are, what program they're looking to get funded. So a lot of it has to do with those kind of things. I do a lot of Google searching, combing through websites. I'm active on LinkedIn and in some grant professionals, organizations, groups. So they are posting things. Sometimes I stumble on things that I think would work. Other times, someone sends something to me that would work for someone. So it's just, all about kind of keeping that search open.
Okay,
Yeah, so it just depends on who and what you're looking for.
gotcha. Now, Derek
One,
asked, did the deadline end for this grant? And I think we answered that already. Yes, it did, but it's an annual thing, so it'll come again next year. Plenty of time to go through the process. John Wessels asked, is it possible to get a grant for a remodeling project to convert several offices into a fellowship hall? I would think it would be easier to do that than the reverse, which is to take a fellowship hall and dismantle it. But I don't specifically know of a grant that would do that. Could the grant dollars be used as part of a larger grant? If you reach out to me, John, my email information will be provided. I can help you walk through that. Okay. Linda asked, when exactly did you get your government unique ID number? I think that's for Shelley. So you applied. How long after you applied did you get your government ID number?
it was like a week or two. It was very quick.
Okay. Okay. And so another question, so we got a week or two for that. That is pretty quick. Shelley, how did you go about finding vendors and getting quotes? Because obviously we know that it had to be from US manufacturers, like no using cameras, China cameras. So how did you go about securing vendors and getting the quotes? And I think you and I talked about this, right?
Yeah, it was when I wrote my newspaper ad, I kind of put those stipulations in there about the diversity that we were looking for um and I literally copy and pasted like language from, the DHS office of what they were looking for and put it in there. I'm like, I'm not having to reinstate. I'm just going to put what they said. And one of which was cameras manufactured in China. I just put that in the newspaper ad. So that way, anyone that was interested could look at that and see what exactly we were looking for and if they met that criteria.
And you know what? That is one of the things you told me like was a hidden cost because you had to run like $150 advertisement that even though you might have already secured your vendors, you might have already had 3 RFPs, you might have already decided who you were going to use, you still had to, in order to get the money and be successful, you had to go through the process of posting it, correct?
Yes, thankfully it was only one day, so it was a minimal cost at that.
Gotcha.
But for the most part, I was just kind of reaching out to the vendors that I had previously worked with, saying, hey, I don't know if you saw our newspaper bid, but if you didn't, please give me an updated one by this date, just to
Okay.
make sure that I got a robust response.
Okay. And I know we're closing in on 3 o'clock here, so let's try and get through these other ones. How long after the April submission did you get your first dollar? Again, this is a reimbursement one, so you might actually have not even gotten your first dollar yet, have you? Okay.
Not yet. That's the
But
thing
when
with
did
government.
you hear? When did you hear that you were awarded?
Yeah. So it was April 13th I applied, and it was September 12th that we found out that of 2023 that we got it.
Okay, and when
And
did you spend your first dollar?
we haven't spent our first dollar yet. We will be next month
Okay,
when we get the work done
okay.
by those 3 projects, and then we'll submit for reimbursement.
And so when did they say, how long did they say the reimbursement should take?
They usually said 4 to 6 weeks, at least around a month, if that.
Okay, okay. Wendy asks if anyone has any suggestions for federal grants for non-religious community-based ministries. Yes, Wendy, some of those links I'm going to provide to you, they're not all faith-based, and they're not all faith-based. So it could be non-religious community functions. Please restate how you contact a PSA for an assessment. Lois, you need to send an email to the CISA contact who will forward it on to your PSA. That link will be provided in the presentation that you receive after this is completed workshop. Suzanne, do you have to provide good question. Did you have to provide a financial history of your church for any grant and or specific expenses for what services you would like to spend the money? So expenses for electricity over 2 years because you want to purchase solar. So something like that.
It depends on what you're applying for, but for this particular one, we did not have to submit church financials. There was just an understanding of, hey, this is what we're awarding you, and you have to be able to pay up front.
Okay.
But I have seen other grants that do want you to have financial reports, and sometimes they even want third-party audited financials. So something to think about.
Okay. People are asking a lot of questions about different types of grants and what's available and not available. And I think, I would say when you get the links that we're sending you, go to those sites and see if your needs will be fulfilled within those grants. Because yes, the answer to some of these questions is definitely, I know for refugees and immigrants, there are funds specific for that. So, for daycare, for serving children, there's funds for that. So for a lot of it, yes, just when you get the information we send, go ahead and start clicking on those links and see what you can find. Someone asked, what is the best source for demographics and crime stats to support the local church? That would be your local DHS office, right? Okay. And
I
then
could add, I think you could also contact your local law enforcement department too, and they could provide you with
yep.
current stats too.
Yep. Would the grant help with steeple repair on a church founded in 1634? This specific one may or may not. You would have to somehow tie it to the vulnerability assessment that you have done for the DHS security grant. Doesn't mean that there aren't funds to repair a steeple for a historic church founded in 1634 from another resource, and we are providing you with what some of those options may be when we send you the presentation. So same thing for building repairs, churches listed on historical registry dating back to the Revolution. There's going to be dollars for all of you. Whether or not you are going to be granted those, I can't speak to that because I am not the funding organization that makes the decisions. There is, someone says our church has an immediate need for a grant to re-roof facility. Would a grant cover that type of expense? Again, it depends on where your church is and if it serves a historic purpose or if it serves any other type of need, and you need to be able to tie that, and it might possibly get covered. I don't know about 500,000. Shelley, I think 150 is a very generous
It
one.
is. I mean, and I'm working on another one now, which is I think a max of 150,000. It's a green energy grant. So I'm looking to replace our chiller on the preschool side.
Nice.
So we'll see.
And then Martha's asking if the Disciples Church Extension Fund is on the list of resources. I did not put that on my list of resources because I think most of the Disciples of Christ churches know that that's a resource, and this is specifically for grants, and I'm not aware that they do grants. I know they do loans and other funding options, but not specifically grants. So I did not put it on mine, but it is definitely a resource. So I think we're at 3:01. Hopefully I've answered everyone's questions. You'll have our email information once you receive everything back from the insurance board when we send the follow-up email to everyone. So you can reach out to me if you want to talk to Shelley. Shelley, I don't know how much available you're going to make yourself because, you know, there's 124 people on this call. It could go crazy. And Michelle,
no, absolutely.
I understand there are
I'm
people who may have questions for you, Michelle, as well. So if you guys are okay with me making your information available, I will share it with people to reach out to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And I think with that, we will wrap up. I appreciate everyone's input, time. Thank you, Shelley, for your expertise and your knowledge. Michelle, thank you for your wisdom and your experience. We couldn't have done it without the two of you. So thank you very much. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Real quick, before we conclude, I would like to thank everyone, but I also want to mention we do have an upcoming webinar, and it is coming up on June 18th, and I will share that in the follow-up email on behalf of Insurance Board. But I just want to give a round of applause for Elizabeth, Shelley, and Michelle for a fantastic presentation today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.